Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Survivor Becomes a Dungeon. If you are new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 145. Chris' Point of View. As the pillar of fire faded in the distance, Chris couldn't help but feel an involuntary shudder travel down his spine and through his tail. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but he could tell that his new boss, Vito, was likely the source of all that fire. Cecil piped up, still staring at the distant horizon as the black smoke slowly gathered back into a billowing pillar that filled the sky. Well, it may look like the situation, whatever it was, has likely been resolved. He mused, seemingly relaxed with a small smile, as he leaned back against the interior of the cart from where he sat. How can you be so sure? Sarah challenged, quirking a brow at the mage as she laid on his side, all the while rather casually using Chris's fluffy tail as a sort of pillow. This did earn curious looks from the other adventurers as they also looked at Cecil, expectantly waiting for his response. Chris had a decent understanding of just how strong Vito was due to the bond he formed with him. But how did Cecil know anything about Vito? Had the boss told Cecil something, or did he know something Chris didn't because he was also a mage? Cecil looked rather smug at the attention, smiling as he looked among the others. He's got a lot of going for him after all. He told me that he was trained by elves for at least several decades in the ways of magic. Like actual elves, not some kind of half-elves or something? Rance asked curiously, looking rather surprised by the revelation. Cecil nodded intently. Yeah, and you've heard the stories, how they weave their hidden cities in deep and uncharted lands using the very nature around them. Following their mysterious methods, he's already managed to form his third mana ring around his heart. Wait, what? Is that true? Wren piped up suddenly, looking up from her chess game with Lily. Chris was mildly surprised when Red's outburst, looking over at his little sister, as he tilted his head curiously. Oh, what's got you all riled up? He could see the excitement plain on her face, along with a hint of confusion, as she didn't believe what she just heard. It's strange, though. It was almost like he could sense her surprise before she said anything. As everyone turned to look at Wren, she suddenly seemed rather sheepish under all the attention, though she soon managed to steel her nerves as she focused on Chris and decided just to explain what was on her mind to him. If what Cecil is saying is right, then Vito is at the pinnacle of what only a few short-lived mages can reach. I wonder if that's what he meant when he said that. She considered before trailing off. Chris recalled the conversation they had last night with Vito, saying something about how he used to be human. Cecil looked pleasantly surprised and almost delighted to Chris's eyes as the mage regarded Wren. You're rather knowledgeable about magic. Are you perhaps studying to become a mage? Now it was Chris's turn to be surprised. Sure, Wren had a mana heart now, but was that really enough to become a mage? He looked over to Wren, who had an equally surprised, if not confused expression on her face, as she looked between him and Cecil, stammering for more than a few moments as her cheeks flashed with embarrassment at the sudden attention that was back on her again. Well, no, I just don't have a lot to do all day, so I read a lot to pass the time. Yeah, I just came into that information some time ago, but I suppose I never thought I could actually apply it, until now at least. Oh, did you develop a mana heart recently? How did you do it? Rance asked, looking intrigued by the line of conversation. At that, Wren shot Chris a glance, and he could almost feel her uncertainty, like she wasn't sure what to say, which was reasonable enough. Well, Vito didn't explicitly say to not talk about what happened last night. Given the secretive nature of whatever he did to give both of them mana hearts, he was likely using a technique that wasn't widely known, so she didn't know how to explain it herself. Chris decided to take the attention from her as he spoke. Nah, I helped her do it, he said simply at first. This did earn him some slight side-eye from both Sarah and Zax, but they kept their mouths shut and their thoughts to themselves. Really? Does that mean that you also have a mana heart? Well, of course you do, if you helped her do it. Though, was she able to develop it naturally through simple meditation, or was it some other method? Rance considered before flashing a bit of a smile. Are you trying to get her to try and follow your line of work? Chris could tell that Rance was just being curious and making casual conversation, though he couldn't help but react a little too sharply at that idea of Wren becoming a thief like him, not to mention all the questions. No, of course not, he replied harshly, narrowing his gaze, drawing his ears back and glaring at the adventurer despite already rationalizing that Rance meant no offense. She'll never do the work I do. I won't let her, he said firmly, while straightening his back and sitting a little taller. Rance simply held up his hand up in a rather placating way, and Chris could see the confusion on his face as Rance glanced at the others. "Whoa, guy, I didn't mean anything by it. But she's got a mana heart now. That alone opens up a lot of doors that aren't available to the average person. It would be a shame to not capitalize on it." Chris couldn't argue with that. It was true after all, and Vita did say that she should be able to live like others her age, now that she has a mana heart. Chris also couldn't help but be a little overprotective of her, as he practically raised her himself for the most of her life, especially after their dad up and disappeared on them. Glancing over at Ren, she flashed a little smile as she scratched her cheek and decided to voice her own opinion. "I actually have some potential work lined up working at one of the guilds as either a receptionist or a scribe of some kind, thanks to one of my tutors. Though that was before I developed a mana heart, so I'm not really sure how that changes things." Cecil pinched in. "Well, those are both certainly respectable trades. You could do so much more, especially if you have an aptitude for magic," he said as he leaned back against the carriage wall. "You could become a healer or maybe an artificer, or even some kind of researcher or scholar in various branches of magic," he explained rather excitedly as he glanced between Chris and Ren. "There is a lot of paths for her to take where she doesn't have to put her life at risk, if that's what you're worried about. Being a wandering adventurer like myself was pretty close to the bottom of the list for a majority of the mages that I knew back at the academy." Looking at Ren, Chris could tell that she was more than a little overwhelmed at the possibilities. Glancing between him and Cecil, but unsure of what to say, Chris decided to speak up as he regarded Cecil this time. "If that's what she wants for her future, and if that's even available to her, then I'll do all that I can do to make sure that she gets that chance. In the meantime, I have no plans or intentions to pressure her into anything. She's gone through a lot of changes recently and needs some time to figure herself out, so if you don't mind, just trust the subject," he said, doing his best to be firm without sounding overly sensitive or upset. It seemed to do the trick, as Cecil just nodded in response. "Yeah, of course, there is no rush after all. You have your whole life ahead of you in the end," he mused kindly, as he looked over to Ren while flashing a kind smile. Chris couldn't help but find that comment at least a little odd, coming from someone who was both younger than him and only a few years older than Ren herself. Regardless, the topic was dropped, and without the distant threat seemingly having been handled, the group went back to their games and pastimes for the next hour. That was until Riley spoke up. "Eyes up, everyone. We have somebody riding towards us," the rabbitkin woman said, shifting around up front and squinting as she looked ahead of them. At that, everyone started getting to their feet where they could, checking their weapons and armor. Though while they did that, the dogkin archer, Lily, made her way up front and looked ahead where Riley had spotted the rider. After a moment, she seemingly relaxed before looking back at Rance. "Wolf," she stated simply, as she shrugged off her quiver and went back to sitting where she had been earlier. "Oh, it's just Vito's wolf," Rance clarified, taking a moment to look out the front to speak for himself before just nodding intently. "You're right. But that isn't Vito riding him. I wonder what happened," he said while trading off, relaxing as well as he set aside his sword and shield. "How can you even see that far? I can barely make out the shape," Riley said with a mild disbelief, glancing back at the adventurers before looking ahead again and squinting some more. "Just a lot of practice and trading," Rance mused as he settled down again, shoulder to shoulder with Lily, and got comfortable once more. Despite everyone else mostly relaxing, Chris decided to remain particularly vigilant, climbing up front and keeping Riley company as he watched Lugosi make their way towards them at a rather steady pace. Much to his surprise, he came to realize that his own vision had significantly improved, being able to make out the wolf and the rider with relative ease the more he intently focused on them. Or maybe it was because they were getting closer outright. Well, either way, he would need to practice and see just what he could do now that he had a mana heart of his own. The next 10 minutes came and went rather quickly as a bloodied catkin girl who had been riding Lugosi came up beside the caravan. Riley brought the caravan to a stop as she looked over the teenage girl, though before she could say anything, the girl spoke up. Do you have any food and water you can spare?" "Lugosi said that I could have some once we got to the caravan," she said, rather bluntly, a clear and distinct tiredness to her voice and in the way she carried herself. Riley went to speak, sounding rather official at first, as she looked at the catkin girl. "You're riding Mr. Vito's familiar, and have approached his caravan. Who are you, and did you say the wolf talked?" she asked, sounding sincerely confused by what she just heard. Chris had to agree, not sure if he heard the girl properly, as he looked at Lugosi curiously, the wolf meeting his gaze with a surprising amount of intelligence behind their eyes, and offering a small and almost charmingly looking smile. Did I fecking stutter? The catkin bit back harshly and irritably, sitting taller on Lugosi's back, despite the clear exhaustion in her voice. I fought for my life, lost a lot of blood, and thankfully had my wounds magically treated. I'm exhausted, thirsty, and fecking starving. Do you have food and water to spare, or are you making a liar out of Lugosi? She stated, sliding off the wolf's back and standing firmly on her own 2 feet, as her tail lashed behind her. Riley was suitably taken aback as far as Chris could tell, opening and closing her mouth a few times as she tried to put together a response. However, she didn't answer quickly enough as the catkin took 2 steps forward, pulling a palm-sized badge from a pouch on her hip, and held it out for Riley and Chris to see. Clear as day were the markings of a rank 3 elite. This badge in particular was a version for family members in an elite household, not necessarily the head of the household or the elite who earned the status for the family. I am Puma Swiftstrike, only daughter to Tulmi Swiftstrike, of the retired silver-ranked adventuring party Swiftstrikers. Using the authority and influence granted to me by my mother's blood and contributions to society, I am commandeering your caravan due to the dire circumstances I find myself in, she ordered with a surprising amount of authority. Now then, if you don't mind, get me some fecking food, she said with a distant venom in her voice before dialing it back and relaxing a bit. Please. I'll pay you back once we return to my home. Riley stiffened with surprise before lowering her head out of respect that is due to someone in Puma standing. Of course, ma'am. Please, if you'll follow me, she said, hopping down from the cart before leading Puma to the rear. Chris watched as the team and the adventurers climbed out from the carriage to stretch their legs and gawk at the young elite they just encountered, leaving him alone with Lugosi, who was now lying in the grass while panting softly. So, you can talk? He asked after a couple of quiet moments. Lugosi stopped panting, looking over at Chris before smiling again. Well, of course I can. Why shouldn't I? He mused in a distinctly masculine voice before going back to panting. Chris blinked with surprise, but played it cool as he simply shrugged a bit. Well, I don't know. Because you're a wolf? Lugosi just smiled some more. But I'm not just a wolf. I'm bonded with Boss Vito, just like you, he said, seemingly stumbling on his words for a moment. So Vito is likely an alias that his new boss is using. Chris wasn't really all too surprised by the idea, but he was curious as to why someone as strong as he would hide his identity. Of course, there were likely all sorts of reasons, but it didn't matter to Chris in the here and now. Well, Lugosi, it is good to finally speak to you properly. I hope that we get along, Chris said kindly, as he even offered a small smile. Lugosi bobbed his head, smiling still as his tails began slowly wag. It's good to speak to you too, Chris. Now then, can you get me some water too? I've been running quite a lot, you know, Lugosi mentioned cheerfully enough, before getting comfortable as he laid his head along his forelegs. Sure, be right back. Chris replied dutifully as he hopped down from the front of the carriage and made his way towards the others. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.